are here. So welcome everyone to the Finance Committee meeting of the Central Virginia Transportation Authority. Thank you all for being here, and we will go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. So please stand if you're able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Ms. Scott, can you please certify the form, please?
Yes, sir. Let me check. Just make sure we don't have any virtual participants.
Okay.
CVTA. Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
I'm here.
Henrico County, Mr. Nelson. Goochland County, Chair Spoonhour.
Here.
New Kent County, Vice Chair Moyer.
Here.
Let's see. City of Richmond, Mayor Stoney, Ms. Nye, and Commonwealth Transportation Board, Mr. Davis.
Here.
That concludes the roll call for attendance, and we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Do we have anyone requesting participation from a remote location?
We do not.
Okay. Board, do we have any considerations or amendments to the meeting agenda? Seeing none, I'll move on. Next on our agenda is the approval of the August 14th meeting minutes, which has been provided. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to review. Do I have a motion to approve for meeting agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Second, thank you, Mr. Carroll. Any comments? All right. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. All right. At this time, I'll open the public comment period for anybody wishing to address the board. Okay, seeing none, do we have any online?
We do not.
Do not. Okay, awesome. Moving into the chair's report. Don't have anything other than just my sincere appreciation for being elected to this position. I really appreciate the trust that's been placed in me, and hopefully we'll do some great things this next year. At that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Parsons for his executive director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 6 on the agenda. Just one thing to report, and this is a follow-up item from the last Finance Committee meeting. I included a staff report on page 8 of the agenda packet. As you may remember, there was some more detailed discussion on the monthly financial reports, and I don't recall who noticed it first, but there was a discussion about tax revenue variation, fluctuation from month to month over the past year, as it was the end of the fiscal year. I did do some research, as you can see in the staff report. The questions that were raised that I passed on were, why are there variations in the fuels tax revenues? I think the discussion here was that it may have something to do with seasonal travel or vacations, but it didn't appear to be cyclical. And then bigger questions about impacts of EV hybrid and fuel efficiency standards on fuels tax revenues, what goes into the projections for future years, et cetera. So I did reach out to VDOT Financial Reporting, the Virginia DMV, and the Department of Taxation with assistance from Catherine Esch at VDOT. And the reporting that we got back, I just included in the staff report almost verbatim from DMV and the Department of Taxation. So there are some unique characteristics from month to month, most notably from DMV that the taxes for May activity are due June 30th. So there's an extra month there where May activities from some localities may show up in June, which would increase the revenues that are shown for that month. Again, as you can see in the staff report, hopefully you've had a chance to review it. Some off-cycle payments can also skew monthly or seasonal trends. And the Department of Taxation does note that changes are due to seasonal holidays and travel. So I think my report to you is that it's a combination of all of the things that we suspected at our last Finance Committee meeting, and that upon review by DMV and Department of Taxation, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The changes from month to month were deemed to be in air quotes normal by the state standards. So I'm happy to follow up again if there are additional questions, but I just present what's in the agenda and hopefully that satisfies everyone's curiosity.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. Any questions or comments from the board, the committee?
Mr. Chair, I just think sometimes this is, I don't know how accurate this is. I think there are fluctuations that he's talking about that create these issues. I mean, just as an example, if you look at last year for December we're talking about the sales and use tax. It's Christmas time. And there's less money spent, or less taxes taken in December of when you look at that tax activity, than there was in November. Now, I guess maybe everybody did their online shopping early and get it all ordered in November and they didn't have to order as much in December. So I just think there's some variations here that I don't think we can necessarily get a handle on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Any other comments? I will say, Mr. Parsons and I had a conversation, and Mr. Parsons, you talked about all the reports that you get monthly that talks about that, and we're going to put together sort of a summary to educate the committee, potentially the full committee, on how the nuts and bolts about how this works. So do we have a target for that, Mr. Parsons? Putting you on the spot, I apologize.
No, I'm happy to put that together and put on the agenda for the next Finance Committee meeting.
Okay, great.
Sure.
Will that help, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Awesome. Okay, is that anything else, Mr. Parsons?
Yes, sir.
All right, moving on to item number 7, our CVTA activities report. We have our financial activities and investment report, Mr. Parsons.
Yes, thank you very much. This is page 10 of the agenda packet. And as Mr. Carroll just noted, we do have the first page on page 10 is the financial activities report through April accrual, noted April tax activity at the end, reported at the end of July. So that is the most current report we have. Year to date, lifetime to date, we continue to see great increases, and in turn the distributions both to the localities as well as GRTC, and the retaining of the revenue, for the regional revenue for our project allocation process. The next page, on page 11, is the July 2024 monthly investment report. And you will note that as I tend to do, I look at the first table at the bottom of page 11 to start, and the numbers have gone way down. I called our fiscal agent yesterday once I saw this and asked why. So the reporting in the table is a little unique. This is only going to show. This is a cumulative interest earnings, as it says, for FY 2025. So the only thing that's showing in the table right now is the month of July. If you look back at last month's June report, it showed all 12 months of FY 24. That's why it showed 11.6 million. So there hasn't been a decrease. We're actually showing a huge increase, almost $300,000 from last July to this July. So again, this is coming up later in the agenda this morning about the interest income, and we're still performing very, very well.
Sure.
I already knew the answer to that, because last year I had the same question. I'm like, wait a minute, what happened? Where'd all the money go? It's like, oh, wait a minute, that's why.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Anything else on that, Mr. Parsons?
Yes, sir.
All right, great. Moving into the TAC activities report, Ms. Smith.
Thank you. Last week, the Falling Trio Working Group met, and the focus of the meeting involved long-term management of the Fall Line Trail. We received good input from the group, additional information needed that would help the jurisdictions, VDOT, and any entities interested in long-term management of the trail. So VDOT and CVTA are pulling this information together for the October TAC meeting. Sports backers and the Virginia Capital Trail Foundation are reviewing the draft long-term management scope of work document. So they'll be giving comments on that. Highlights of updates on the status of the trail included the city's groundbreaking ceremony for the Bryan Park section, and that ceremony was held August 28th. VDOT also shared that they're on track for advertising the southern section later this month as a design build contract. The topic of the trail maintenance continues to come up both at the working group and with TAC. That's an important topic that we'll continue to discuss at both groups. So we are looking for making sure that there's going to be sufficient funding in place for maintenance of the trail. TAC met this week, and we are continuing to work on the regional funding reallocation policy. If we can get the subcommittee together, hopefully we'll have something to bring to you at your next meeting. And then we also took action to recommend approval of the FY25 local allocation plan, which is on your agenda for later. The bulk of the meeting was discussion on CVTA regional interest earnings and also the regional project selection and allocation framework. Chet's going to brief you on the discussion we had regarding interest earnings. And then with the framework document, we've made really good progress in reviewing our parking lot items and are pretty close to done. There are a couple topics that we'll continue to talk about through the year. But we should be able to give you an update on the remainder of the parking lot items by the end of the year. That's all I have. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Board, any questions for Ms. Smith?
Mr. Chair, just one comment.
Okay, please.
I think it goes without saying that the TAC is a very dedicated group of individuals for the CVTA, and kudos to them for the dedication they put forward, especially related to the project allocation framework. I mean, this is a process that started at least 6 months ago, if not more, in reviewing the adopted framework that we currently use. And I think what we're gonna come out of this with by the end of the calendar year is an improved process that's gonna bring together all 9 jurisdictions in the region and help staff better prepare for regional project allocations and awards in the next round next year.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Parsons.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Sorry I was late, first of all. I just wanted to say that the issue about the maintenance of the trail is really important to the city of Richmond, and I know we're gonna discuss the interest in a minute, but using that interest dollars portion of it to help maintain the trail is really important to the city, and I think Henrico as well.
Thank you, Ms. Knight. Okay. All right, moving on. We will move into other business. Item number 1 is the fiscal year 24 annual certification of the local allocation plan. Mr. Parsons.
Yes, thank you very much. This is actually 2 items in the same agenda topic. The first is and we do this every year. The first is the annual certification of FY24 local CVTA expenditures. So this is essentially the jurisdictions are signing off that over the past fiscal year, all of the CVTA dollars that came locally, so the 50% revenues that come back, have been spent for the right purposes, transportation uses only. So we do collect, and the full authority takes action to approve the annual certifications. I have checked in with every jurisdiction. We are still awaiting 3 certifications to be signed through the board or council process. But the other 6 are in hand. My recommendation today, I don't know if take this as two separate actions or one, is for the Finance Committee to recommend full approval of all 9 certifications. I will have the other 3 in hand by the time we get to the board meeting on the 27th, and to present them in a package. So that's the first item.
Okay. So,
Would you like me to cover the second?
yeah, why don't you cover the second, and we'll decide if we want to take them as later.
Yes, okay. So the second item is more of a planning document, but this is the FY25 local allocation plan. So this is essentially from each jurisdiction. I've compiled input from all of our TAC members essentially that show the intent of each jurisdiction for the current fiscal year and what the CVTA local dollars are intended to go towards. So it's essentially a project plan for FY25, so from July 1 through June 30th, what all 9 jurisdictions plan to do with their CVTA local dollars. And we use this as essentially as a check when we come to the end of next year and we prepare the certification documents. We cross-check and see if the allocation plan was followed, if there was a lot of fluctuation in terms of what projects were actually financed through CVTA local dollars. And then it's a good end of year summary document that staff can use, and we compile this on an annual basis so we understand where the spending has gone and what the priorities have been for each of our members. This local allocation plan is not set in stone. It is a living document, and as priorities change, as they do during the year, we get updated input from our TAC members on new projects, or a project X found funding somewhere else, so we took that off our list. Things change. So at this point, it's the requested action is to recommend full authority approval of both the annual certification for FY24 and the local allocation plan for FY25.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Parsons. So the first action, I'll look for a motion to recommend full authority approval of the certification. And what we're actually doing, Mr. Parsons, Mr. Gregory, we're not necessarily certifying, this is just the recommendation to the full board. So we're not actually certifying anything. We're saying, because I think the normal question would be, well, how can we certify if they haven't, those 3 jurisdictions haven't turned in their form? We believe they're coming and it will go in front of the full committee, but we were not actually certifying it.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I think I can clarify that for
Well, please do.
you. Make a
Use all the help I can get.
make a motion to forward all 9 reports, and the other 3 come in, to the full committee for consideration for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Second. Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you very much. And now, moving to the second of the, looking for a motion to recommend to the full authority the 2025 local allocation plan.
Mr. Chair, I have a question,
Yes, Mr. Carroll.
and it's for Barb Smith, who is here. I'm looking at this report and I see that in the Chesterfield, we're now reporting our use of the money for the debt service, which I understand is correct. However, I would still like to see on this report the projects that we're utilizing these funds for through our debt service issuance. I think from a transparency standpoint, every other jurisdiction that's listed here is showing all of their projects that they're utilizing the local dollars for. And I want us to be as transparent as everyone else. And although we are utilizing the money, and it is accurate to say that we're utilizing the local dollars for debt service, I think it's important for us to list. And so I would ask that we make sure before this goes to the full committee, that this report gets amended with those additional listings for Chesterfield County's projects. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will make a motion that we forward this report to the full committee for consideration with the changes recommended for Chesterfield's listing on this report.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Have a motion.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Knapp. Motion second, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Moving on to item number 2, CVTA Regional Fund Interest Earnings. Mr. Parsons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at page 21 in the agenda packet, this is a staff report that was first discussed on Monday with the Technical Advisory Committee because many of the options are project-based, so I was interested in getting their feedback before bringing it to you. At our last Finance Committee meeting on August 14th, we discussed the performance of the regional funds that have been reinvested, and membership here discussed the opportunity to develop plans that could benefit from those interest funds being put towards additional use rather than just being reinvested or sitting in the bank. And what I've done was come up with some options for application of that interest income. And again, took guidance from the TAC on Monday, but just to review the options, so you will be caught up. Continue as normal, as we have done for the past 3 years, is continuing reinvesting the funds with the goal of interest earnings growth. Second option is application of those earnings to regionally identified projects. This was a pretty healthy discussion with the TAC, and our current interest earnings, as I just mentioned a few items ago, at the end of June was 11.6 million. So we use that as our basis for discussion. Out of the regionally committed projects through the first 3 rounds of CVTA regional allocations, these 5, with a balance remaining less than that 11.6, were included for discussion. There are at least 24 additional projects that have a price tag larger than 11.6 million. That could be partially funded with this type of interest earnings. The committee discussion was that this was all great, but there are also other sources of funds that are being considered and applied for, including Smart Scale, federal grants, other types of things. So it was a little, Barb might have a better word, but little awkward or kind of the timing was not right for some of the members to discuss project funding at this point. So we moved on to item 3, which was to the last bullet of item 2 on top of page 22, is that the fall line wayfinding plan. As you know, the CVTA just adopted that plan, I believe last month on August 9th. We do have a need for committed funding to supply the fabrication, the purchase of materials and installation of signage that follows that wayfinding plan along the entire 43-mile corridor. The dollar amount for that wayfinding installation was estimated to be 1.5 million, which would cover the cost of the wayfinding for the entire corridor. So that was an option that received good feedback. And then finally, as you know, the financial policies and procedures were amended earlier this year, I believe early 2024, to include additional language that establishes a working capital reserve, which is 3 months of the budgeted annual CVTA regional funds that can be used for multiple uses, but really at this point it's to provide some surety and some safety for the authority in the event that project costs go over, in the event we issue bonds at some point, that debt service could be provided, at least to start, or safety for this reserve. So the discussion was, at this point, we do not have any funding set aside for that capital reserve. So this might be a good application for the interest income to start establishing that 3-month period. So what we did was discuss 6 scenarios, as you can see at the bottom of page 22, which is either one or a combination of these 3 options. The TAC ultimately came up with a 7th scenario, which is what is moving forward for recommendation today, or for your information. And that is to fully fund 1.5 million for the fall line wayfinding plan implementation. And then to apply the balance to the working capital reserve, or some combination of that balance. And there was additional discussion at the TAC about reinvestment of funds. I had a detailed conversation with Ms. Longnecker yesterday afternoon, and she assured me that no matter what choice is made, these funds are reinvested automatically. They are always earning interest, so there does not need to be a dedicated action to reinvest the funds. That's going to happen no matter what. If the recommendation is to put funds into a working capital reserve, those funds will be reinvested until they're necessary or need to be used. So at this point, I think the recommendation from the TAC with the modification about the reinvestment is that Finance Committee consider making a recommendation for setting aside 1.5 million for the wayfinding plan implementation and dedicating the balance of the funds to establishing the working capital reserve.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. That's a lot to chew on.
Yes.
Questions, thoughts?
Yeah, good. I'm at least in my, looking at the next years, I would think we need to get that reserve someplace substantially more than, of course, what we have now, but at least half that money should be going to reserves, because I think these are, the green numbers are good numbers this year. They won't be possibly good numbers the next couple years, and we have to be ready for that. And that's not gonna fund a lot of things, that interest, but at least we're doing the right thing, is keeping that three months. We'll have maybe at least 1.5 months, set aside. So just from my point, the other half of it, that whatever's spent, and I understand those priorities.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Mr. Parsons?
Just to piggyback Mr. Moyer's comments, if the committee chooses to recommend setting funds into the capital reserve, if we use the balance of the amount we talked about, we'll be about 2/3 of the way there.
Oh, okay. Well,
So
very good.
it'll be very substantial.
Very good.
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Carey?
I don't know why I didn't think of this before,
Because you weren't amongst all the greatness.
but I think one of the things that we should have established as a fiscal policy is that a certain percentage on the monthly basis of money that comes in through investment, a fixed number that we could percentage-wise dedicate to go into the reserve. The money still stays in the investment pool, but we start setting money aside every month based on what's what is made through investment. This month is $850,000, for example. So that will continue to incrementally build it up. And quite frankly, next year, when the discussion comes up about how much should we set aside for the reserve, we won't have to have that discussion because we will have already accomplished that mission by having a fiscal policy in place for that. I do agree with some of the other recommendations, but I do agree with what my colleagues from Richmond and Enrico brought up, that in the future, we're gonna also have to figure out how, working with VDOT and for the other jurisdictions, but also for Richmond and Riker, who are gonna be maintaining their sections of the fall line, what type of commitment can we make for that as well? And again, that could also be a portion as a fiscal policy that's set aside in the future to go into a fund. We don't know what the maintenance program's gonna look like and what it's gonna cost, but the sooner we start setting money aside for it, the better it will be in the future, and we won't have to worry about trying to find money later and going, oh, oops, we gotta do this. We've already got an account established. And again, as long as that money's sitting in the account and not being used, it helps us with our fiscal overall position when people look at how much, when creditors, for example, or if we decide to do bonding in the future, look at how much actual cash we have sitting in the bank. It does nothing but help us. And so I think, that's something that we should have TAC discuss as a future recommendation, that the finance committee can move forward. If we get consensus on it, but I think it's a fiscal policy to, quite frankly, we should have put in place before. I don't know why I didn't think of it when I was chair, I apologize, but for some reason it popped into my head today.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Other thoughts?
Mr. Chair. Yes, I just wanted to reiterate my support for the maintenance, and also just to speak to what Mr. Carroll just brought up. I think a funding policy would be appropriate. We've done that on the Richmond side. I will say, we created a policy, and now about 6 years later, we're reworking it. So, something that does allow a little flexibility in the beginning so that we don't put ourselves in a box, I think might be prudent in this case, just because it's all so new. But with the trails still being built and everything, we have some time to figure out the maintenance funding. But I just don't want it to fall off the radar.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Mr. Parsons?
I'd invite Chair Smith to chime in, but Zach did have a very committed discussion to this exact question about maintenance and how to separate that from the cost of fabrication and signage. And the next fall and work group meeting in October, that will be on the agenda.
Great.
We do not yet, I think we need to get our arms around what a maintenance fund should look like and
Right.
what our goal is for how much should be there, what the possible costs would be. And I think we're gonna try and put all those things down on paper, and then we'll be able to better talk to the Finance Committee about
That's
what our
great.
needs are and how to best achieve those goals.
Sure.
Needs and options, yeah.
Mr. Chair, just to add to that, and I apologize, I'm not trying to monopolize the conversation here, but we also have to remember that there are other jurisdictions that are not part of the Fall Line Trail. And so as we continue to dedicate some of these funds for that, I also think we need to be mindful of some of the other needs some of the other jurisdictions may have in some of their transportation projects. And so, in order to be fair and equitable, I think that's something we need to look at as well. When we originally set the money aside for the Fall Line Trail, it was like $113 million, something to that effect, maybe 105. We also gave back to the local jurisdictions that were not part of the Fall Line Trail their additional 2-year investment of revenues that came into the 35% pot from their jurisdictions. I'm not suggesting that, but I do think we need to look at, when we're talking about these reserves, if there's another way that because we're talking about, if we're dedicating money aside for long-term maintenance, that's gonna be a big number eventually. Okay. And if we're setting money aside for the Wayfinder plan, which I think is important, again, that's a big initial investment, and it's also gonna require maintenance over time as those signs get vandalized, get knocked down, or need to be replaced or updated because new things have been happening and added to the Fall Line Trail. So I just wanna make sure that we're mindful of not just, the 5 jurisdictions that are part of the Fall Line, but everybody else as well.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Any other thoughts? So I'll just chime in on what's in front of us. So I like the idea of the funding we need to figure out how to fund the signage and the wayfinding plan. So I like that. I also like the idea of using the interest to build up the reserves. We've passed a policy that says we're planning on having reserves. We really haven't come up with a plan to do that. I believe tax dollars should be used. I don't believe in squirreling tax dollars away. We're taking it out of people's pockets. What I like about this is that this is interest on those tax dollars. So this isn't actually tax dollars, it's the interest on those tax dollars. That will still continue to gain interest. So I think it's very prudent for us to put this in, take a big chunk up to build that reserve with these funds. So that's my preference. Does anybody care to venture a motion to what we want to recommend to the full authority? So we have three scenarios in front of us. You like one of those, or we can craft a fourth?
Mr. Chair, I'll try. Okay.
Would you like me to restate scenario 7?
Maybe this is a joint. I make a motion that we fund the wayfinding plan for a fall line at a tune of $1.5 million. Take half of the interest income and put to the reserves. And then have TAC look at other projects that could be used with the rest of the interest.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
Okay.
Second. All right, discussion?
Mr. Chair. Yes, Mr. Chair. I think that, I like the motion, but I also think that there will probably be other members of the authority that will be interested in what all of the options were as it comes forward. So I mean, I have no problem with moving the motion forward, but I do think all of the information that has been presented needs to be shared with all the members. So they know what the options were and what the recommendation we're making. That may open it up for more discussion, or it may not, but I just, in the interest of transparency, the TAC put a lot of work into these recommendations, and I wanna make sure that, I know that the representatives of the TAC that belong to the jurisdictions are aware of it, but the actual electeds may not, and so I just wanna make sure they all get the same information.
Thank you. Other comments? The only comment I would make, and I appreciate the motions more, is that, you know, I think Mr. Parsons in his summary mentioned that there were a lot of other projects, but the costs were, you know, were over that, what we would have. And I can't believe that I'm saying this, but at the end of the day, in transportation, $5 million, which would be left for projects, isn't a lot in the transportation world. And we would be kind of nickel and diming it. I would personally rather see the full amount go into the fund, because that gives us a bigger bang for the proverbial buck.
Mr. Chair.
Sir?
To your point, though, the second part of what I brought up just a minute ago has to do with the smaller jurisdictions. So there may be some projects that are not on this list right now, that are part of small jurisdictions that they're seeking funding for, that $5 million would make a big difference in some of those smaller projects. And so it could be that there's a project sitting out there, we'll say in Powhatan, they need a 1.5 million for, or there could be one in New Kent that they need 1.5 million for, there could be one in Ashland, and so it would give us some equitability, or Crucial, right? Would be some equitability, from that perspective, that we, you know, we fund the wayfinding plan, we put 50% in, you know, in the reserve, and then bring forward a proposal for consideration for a dedication for fiscal policy, dedicating some of that reserve for those other things we talked about a minute ago. But I do think it's important to look at some of the small jurisdictions, to say, is there an immediate need? You know, part of what we're trying to do with this, God, government moves so slow, is to try and get some of these projects out of the ground as quick as possible. That'll make a difference in the communities, and not just the big ones, but some of the small ones too. And so just a thought.
Mm-hmm. I like that thought. The one thing I would say is that we don't, to your earlier point, Mr. Carroll, is we don't have a plan to fund the reserve. We said we're gonna do this, we're gonna put the money aside, we have money, we're
I
saying.
got another motion coming after this.
We've got stuff aside, we don't have it put aside, so we are looking to say, okay, we know we want to have a reserve fund, we've not funded that reserve fund, and we plan on funding it with future tax dollars when we have the money here now to potentially do it.
So, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Does it make sense to, I mean, TAC came up with these recommendations, right, for now and possible consideration for later based on the interest. And we're looking at, you know, an overall fiscal policy to fund the reserve, so on and so forth. Does it also make sense for them to look at, like, how we use the interest dollars? Is that different? Is there a different lens? Like, what's an equitable way to look at those interest dollars overall, like on an ongoing basis, to fund different projects, to Mr. Carroll's point, just to make it equitable and, share the wealth, if you will.
That's a great question, which spawns another one. I guess where I kind of fall back is, this is the tax recommendation, is that it goes, so Ms. Smith, can you talk a little bit about what's on the table now? This, we'd be looking at 5 million-ish to go back to projects. Is that as valuable in tax mind as, and maybe you have to go back and can't represent everybody, but is that as valuable as fully funding the reserve?
Yeah, to clarify, the projects that are shown in here, the options and scenarios were put together by CVTA staff. So this is what TAC reviewed, and when we got to the number 2 with the project ideas, the discussion was a few things. That it was a little premature because some of the projects had been submitted for smart scale and might get funded that way. One of the projects, there was an identified funding source already, so it's off the list. And then there was discussion that there are other projects, while the 11.6, I think that was what the threshold was looked at to come up with a list of projects. They might need more than 11.6, but they could still benefit from a lesser amount. And those projects aren't included in this item at all. So there were other jurisdictions that were concerned that they had projects that just didn't make the cut because of the amount that is needed, but that could benefit from some interest earnings as well. So when it came to number 2 and the idea of using interest earnings for projects, we thought that was just premature and we disregarded that, and the TAC supported using the money towards the wayfinding and the capital reserve, and committed to having more discussion about the Fall Line Trail maintenance item.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could just clarify, I'm not saying stop what we're doing to create a policy. I'm just saying for the future.
Sure, no,
Okay.
understood.
What was the motion on the floor?
So, thank you, so the motion on the floor, okay,
It was a motion and it was second.
I
yes,
jotted it down and confirm with Mr. Moore that this accurately reflects his motion, just to make sure we stay on task here. The motion is, as I reported, to recommend to the full board to dedicate 1.5 million of CVTA interest income to fund the Fall Line Trail wayfinding plan, design and construction, to dedicate 1/2 of the balance of interest income to the working capital reserve for reinvestment, and to dedicate the remaining half to fund regionally identified projects to be identified. Given I believe that's the motion, as Mr. Moyer stated earlier. And I think given the conversation about the regional projects that may be subject to funding, I think that probably does the best job to give yourselves the flexibility you want to have to identify projects later. And this, of course, would just be a recommendation to the full board, so.
correct. Okay. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of recommending that plan to the full board, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, carries.
Mr. Chair, still under that topic. I would like to make a motion to instruct staff to draft and work on a fiscal policy relating to what I talked about for the reserve, a portion. I'll make recommendations and maybe I'll consult with our financial advisors to say what portion should we look at. For example, I just want staff to come up with a draft policy for us to consider at the next finance committee meeting to bring forward to the full committee for consideration. That would be my motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carroll, do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you. All right. Bond finance validation.
Yes, sir, thank you very much. This is the last page of the agenda packet, page 23. At our last full authority meeting, August 9th, the CVTA, the full authority, received a report on bond finance validation. I introduced it, and it was led by bond counsel. Finance Committee and TAC have both discussed the bond validation process, including presentations and additional materials, and feel that it's the appropriate next step to prepare the CVTA to issue debt in the future. So at the full board, we had a presentation by Megan Martz-Gilliland with Kaufman and Knoll's. She is here with us today. And at that meeting, Chair Davis asked that the matter be further reviewed and vetted by the Finance Committee. At this point, we are not prepared to rehash that presentation today. We would happily, if there are questions or concerns by the members of the Finance Committee, I believe that Mr. Davis had intended for that to be discussed today. And the recommended action is to recommend that the full authority approve for me to proceed with bond counsel on the bond finance validation process.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Parsons. All right, any comments, questions, thoughts, pleas for mercy? Carol, you first to say something.
I'm waiting to see if I'm gonna make a motion.
I'm happy to entertain a motion.
I'll make it then.
Good.
Motion to recommend the full authority approval for the executive director to proceed with the bond finance validation process.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll.
Second.
Second. All right, so,
Under discussion, Mr. Chair.
thank you.
Just to be clear for the community at large, who may or may not be watching, or may watch in the future. All this does is, again, to position the CVTA, number one, to certify the process so that it will prevent people from challenging us in the future in court, if I'm correct, Mr. Gregory. As to whether or not we actually have the authority to issue bonds in the first place. So it actually positions us for that. And then in no way makes it mandatory for the CVTA to issue bonds in the future. All this does is position us to, if that becomes a consideration in the future, to be able to do that. Is my summarization of that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna put our chair on the spot. Mr. Davis, you had asked us to review and vet. Was there anything in particular that you wanted the finance committee to review and vet? Okay.
You've covered it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of recommending that we move forward to proceed with the finance validation process, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. All right. Moving along. Maybe. All right, now's the time for CBT Finance Committee member comments. So if you have anything you want to share about what's going on in your amazing locality, that'll be the time to do it.
Mr. Chairman, how this has to do with the CVTA is because you guys have helped spend money to get the 3 lanes and the gap to be covered. And one of the benefits of that is how we're being looked at by the owner of Colonial Downs, which is Churchill Downs. This past weekend, we had the Virginia Derby, which was over 5,000 people attended, of course, nationwide broadcast. And also, next year, we're gonna have, the Colonial Downs is gonna have a 4-day session in March for racing, a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And Saturday, March 15th, is gonna be the Virginia Derby. That winner will be an automatic enter to the Kentucky Derby. So we will have some very interesting looking thoroughbreds at that race, and hopefully a good crowd,
Excellent,
so,
nice.
thank
That was the
you.
most interesting workaround to get to the
like that?
Kentucky Derby.
You saw where it
to
was
a transfer-
going?
Yeah, but it was good.
Excellent. Any other committee member comments? All right, seeing none. Our next meeting is October 9th, right here. So at that, I will